Did your dentist tell you that you need a root canal, but you don't know what a root canal is? Let's talk about it on today's episode of FLOSSUP.
Floss it up, floss it up, floss it up, floss it, floss it up, floss it up, floss it up, floss it, floss it up, floss it up, floss it up, floss it. If you don't floss every day, you bound to get decay.
FLOSSUP! Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about root canals. Before I jump into the good and the bad, let me first talk about what a root canal is and who actually needs them. Let's go. When you think about a root canal, I want you to think about the pulp or the nerve of the tooth. If you remember from episode number 4, here's where the pulp or the nerve is. The reason why I want you to remember the pulp and the nerve with a root canal is because we're going to be removing that nerve. Here's how we do it. Now, when we start a root canal, we will obviously be getting you nice and numb. Once that process is done, we'll be using something called a rubber dam and a clamp. And here's what that looks like. And what that does is it isolates that one tooth that we're working on. It holds back your tongue, your saliva, your cheeks, everything to just expose that one tooth to make sure it's nice and isolated, and we can make sure that the procedure is controlled. Once we get the tooth nice and isolated, we will create something called an access. If you recall from episode number 3, where we have the enamel, the dentin, and then the pulp, you can see that the pulp is 2 layers underneath the enamel and the dentin. We have to drill through the enamel and the dentin in order to gain access to the pulp. Once we do that, we use special files to go in there and remove the nerve and shape the canals, and it looks something like this. Once the canals are nice and clean and shaped, we will use these custom fitted gutta percha cones. Now, when we're shaping these canals, we're making them a certain width, and that width matches up with the gutta percha cone that we use. This will go into the canal nice and smoothly, and it will be nice and snug to seal everything off. Once that part is done, the root canal is considered done. Here's what that looks like on an x-ray. We remove your pulp or your nerve of your tooth if the tooth is considered necrotic or dead. How do we do that? Well, we test the nerve to see if it is alive by doing something called an endo-ice test or a vitality testing. We spray something really cold on a cotton pellet or a little cotton Q-tip. We place it on each of your teeth and we wait to see if you have a cold response. If you feel the cold, great, the nerve is alive. If you don't feel the cold, that means the nerve may possibly be dead or necrotic. Now, sometimes you may feel the cold sensation, but it'll last for like 15 or more seconds. If that's the case, that means that your nerve is infected and it's partially alive, meaning you're still feeling the cold, but it's only a matter of time before it dies off. These are all signs that the dentist will use to determine whether you need a root canal or not. Another test is an electric pulp test. Looks like this. We place something on your tooth, it sends a small electrical current to your nerve, and we see if you feel any type of sensation. If you do, again, the nerve is alive. If you don't, the nerve may be dead, and you may need a root canal. That's how we test if your tooth is necrotic. We also look for different signs, like we look at x-rays to see if you have a periapical lesion or an infection that is forming underneath the root of a tooth, which looks like this on an x-ray. We also will take a look inside the mouth to see if there's any type of swelling, if there's any drainage, if there's any pus draining out, if there's a little bubble or a pimple that's there in your gums, a lot of different things, but it all comes down to your nerve, your pulp. If something is wrong with the nerve or with your pulp, that's why you will need a root canal. Now, your nerve can become necrotic from several different reasons. The 2 main reasons is, one, most obvious, bacteria. If you leave a cavity too long, the bacteria will work its way through the enamel, will work its way through the dentin, and eventually get to your pulp or to your nerve. Once it does that, the nerve becomes infected, starts to die off, you'll need a root canal. The other way your nerve can become necrotic or dead is if you get trauma to the face. If something hits you right in the mouth, and over the course of a few months or so, you start noticing that your tooth is starting to change color. It's starting to change into like a grayish brown color. That can mean that your tooth was traumatized enough to kill off the nerve. There was swelling inside of the nerve, but because it's trapped underneath the dentin and the enamel, the blood has nowhere to go. It can't really swell up. So it ends up killing itself. And when it dies off, that's when you have a dead nerve and you need a root canal. Now let's talk about some of the good things about root canals. The most obvious, avoiding extractions. You can save your tooth. Why extract a tooth and have to deal with the whole healing process and waiting for the socket to close off, which can look something like this? You can avoid all of this by simply keeping your tooth and having a root canal done. Also, the entire experience of a root canal with the healing and everything is typically less painful than when an extraction is done. So think about it. You have a tooth taken out. Once the numbness wears off, you're going home and you got to wait about 2 to 3 weeks for that socket to close off. It's very tender. It's hard to eat in that area. Food gets piled into a whole bunch of stuff. With a root canal, you don't really have to worry about that. Everything is done internal. Your tooth is saved. It's still there. You can, majority of the time, eat right after you're done. Now let's talk about some of the downsides to root canals. Number one, most obvious, is cost. Some insurances will not cover a root canal for certain teeth or for any teeth. Check with your insurance company to see what is covered. Also, once you get a root canal, there's some added cost on top of it because once we go through the enamel and the dentin to create the access, now your tooth is more vulnerable to being fractured. That's why typically after you get a root canal, we will recommend that you get a crown to cover up the whole entire tooth, 360 degrees, and protect the tooth. Here's what that looks like. And I'll be making a separate video to talk about crowns later on. Another downside to root canals is there can be some missed canals. Well, what I mean by that is some teeth have more than one root. These roots sometimes have more than one canal in them. If a canal is missed or not seen during the root canal cleaning process, that tooth can still be painful. You can still get an infection from that tooth. If that does happen, you may need something called a retreat, where we have to go in, redo the whole root canal process, remove the gutta percha that we placed in there before, clean and shape everything again, try to find that missed canal that we missed, and then fill that back up again. Typically, this doesn't happen, but it can happen. And there you have it. That's what a root canal is, and those are the pros and the cons of root canals. I hope that helped answer a lot of your questions. If you continue to have more questions, please feel free to comment below or simply just send me a personal message. Also, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so I can make sure this information is getting out there. Thank you so much. Floss up.
Floss it up, floss it up, floss it up,